What's going on, everybody? This is your tour guide around the SWAC Wells coming at you with another video today. Y'all make sure y'all lock in with us. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and become a part of the SWACTalk family by becoming a member. 99 cents gets you a membership to the YouTube channel. We have special perks coming at you. We're going to be dropping special members only videos and shorts. I'm going to have rants and reactions to different things that I want to put there. So if you want to get everything, man, become a member of the Swag Talk crew for 99 cents and get down with the get down, man. And so we're going to still be bringing y'all a lot of stuff, swag smoke and everything like that, and all our normal videos. But we also bring y'all that membership tier. So get down with that. Check out the Facebook and Instagram, both Swag Talk, Twitter Swag Talk 76. And now let's get on with the show, man. Let's do it.
Wednesday, Sundays, catch the ride. Football, hoops, we breaking wide. Stats and facts, truth on high. SWAT talk where the convo's real. From Texas to Florida, we seal the deal. Just pull up, the vibes are real. Chopping it up, we spin the wheel. Hit the corner of the field, we strategize. Breaking the game down, no disguise. Play by play, we analyze. Eyewear sharp, we magnify. SWAT talk where the convo's real. From Texas to Florida, we seal the deal. Just pull up, the vibes are real. Chopping it up, we spin the wheel. Wednesdays, heat, Sundays, ignite. We talking legends shining bright. Back and forth, day or night. This the plug, we bring the light. SWAT talk where the convo's real. From Texas to Florida, we seal the deal. Cats pull up, the vibes are real. Chopping it up, we spin the wheel. Wednesdays, heat, Sundays, ignite. We talking legends shining bright. Back and forth, day or night. It's the plug, we bring the light. SWAT talk where the convo's real. From Texas to Florida, we seal the deal. Cats pull up, the vibes are real. Chopping it up, we spin the wheel.
All right, everybody, what is going on? How y'all doing? Welcome to another edition of Swag Talk, the show we cover the swag inside and out. Of course, I am your tour guide around the swag Wells coming at you, and we are gonna wrap up our preseason um, all SWAC team presented by Swag Talk. So we're gonna go ahead and jump into this. We're gonna do the defense and special teams just in time for media day. We will be back on Wednesday to kind of recap what happened at media day. And Thursday Swag Smoke show gonna be dedicated to media day. We did a look back at last season media day, so if you want to check that out, you can check it out. In our on the Swag Talk YouTube channel. We had a good time on Swag Smoke last week, recapping last season media day. We're gonna do the same on Thursday for this season. So let's go ahead and jump into this, man. We're gonna go ahead and make this thing happen. So we're gonna start off with our first team defense. I decided instead of doing four linemen, three linebackers, four defensive backs, I did four, two, and five. Just I mean, most teams play five guys in the secondary nowadays. Sometimes you have a guy who may be like a hybrid type of guy, but I decided to kind of do it that way, and it still worked out pretty well. So we're gonna go ahead and go with the first team defensive line. This D line is stacked. Honestly, basically, even if you just go on the first couple guys, there is a really strong group of defensive linemen that return for most teams. So we'll start off with Jeremiah Williams from Jackson State. In 13 games of action last season, he had 58 tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and 4 quarterback hurries. Um, Guy who really, really did not early in the season did not get the recognition. Um, just really was overlooked for whatever reason by the SWAC, but this is a dominant guy on the D line for Jackson State, and he continues, and he'll be back this season to wreak more havoc. This was pretty much a no brainer, and honestly, he could be one of the few guys who are in contention for SWAC preseason defensive player of the year. I don't have any disagreement if you feel that way. Obviously, I kind of feel a little different, but I can totally see it. Also on the first team is Kelby Givens from Southern, the reigning SWAC defensive player of the year. 73 tackles, 27 tackle for loss, 12 sacks, 13 quarterback hurries, and three forced fumbles. Honestly, this is a guy who got better as the season went on because, his team started to, realize that there was a guy on the opposite side that they had to pay attention to. He didn't get as many double teams as he got early last season, but definitely a guy who can change games, who can get in backfield and wreak havoc. And he just a solid pass rusher, can play the run and do a little bit of everything. So he's also on first team. And my next first team guy is Bryce Cage from Groundling. In 12 games of action, 49 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, four sacks, five quarterback hurries, and a forced fumble. I think last season, Grambling defense, everybody was overshadowed by Andrew Jones, and rightfully so. I mean, the guy was a machine all over the field. Whether it was in the backfield or down the field, sideline to sideline, he was everywhere. So a lot of people didn't really pay attention to the guys working in front of him and behind him on an individual basis. Bryce Cage. Um, uh, was one of two guys on the defensive ends at Grambling that were able to wreak some havoc. I expect him to maybe get a little bit more production since there will be more tackles available. Like I say, he had a pretty solid end of the season, and I expect him to be solid at the beginning of this season. So he's also on the first team list, and also joining them on first team is Davion Westmoreland from FAMU. Um, they're gonna miss James Ash. I'm gonna put it that way. But Westmoreland was another guy on that D line that really was able to kind of make some things happen in 12 games of action. 33 tackles, eight tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, three quarterback hurries. So, you can expect to see his numbers go up again. Like I said, when you get to like after the first couple guys, you can kind of rearrange these guys any way you want. But, I think all on this list are worthy candidates. And the linebackers were very easy. Um, you had two guys who really were linchpins on their defense and are only gonna get better as the season goes on. First off, you have Reed Pulliam from Jackson State. Led the team with 65 tackles last season, 7 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, three pass breakups, three quarterback hurries, one forced fumble, one fumble recovery. A guy all over the field. Like I said, can make plays in the backfield, can get out of the quarterback, can stop the run. Uh, does can play pass coverage with those three pass breakups. Um, also, can get the pressure on the quarterback, and definitely one of the top linebackers in the conference at this point, and a guy who is a playmaker and a troublemaker for teams on offense. As teams struggle to move the ball against the defense, especially in the second half of games, um, they made it pretty complicated with just with the way that they got after you and made things tough. And he was definitely the leader of that. Also on the first team list is Vince Page from Southern. 12 games of action, 84 tackles, 10.5 tackles for loss, four sacks, four quarterback hurries, and a forced fumble. This was a guy who did not start the season. He played in, obviously he played in 12 of the 13 games, but he did not start as the season as a starter. But he was able to step into that spot and just progress and be a playmaker at that spot. Again, you can see he can get in the backfield, make tackles. He can make tackles for loss. He can get sacks. He can chase guys down the field. He can do a little bit of everything. Got a good edge to him, and really is a guy who can disrupt things at that spot. So I think he's a worthy candidate um, on this group here. Next up, is our defensive backs, and on this list, we have some guys who really can make some things happen. We'll start off with Antoine Watts from Bethune-Cookman. Last season, 12 games of action, 70 tackles, one tackle for loss, two interceptions, four pass breakups, and a forced fumble. One thing about Bethune-Cookman last season is they had some really good individual guys, and this was a guy who played in the secondary with Raymond Woody III, who also put up some big numbers. But sometimes you look at tackles and things, it's relative. And with a team like this, that their defense gave up a ton of yards and plays down the field. So of course, your secondary guys are gonna make a lot of tackles, but still, if you can be in position to make the plays and make them, then you're doing what you're supposed to do. Sometimes it's not up to you what happens. Sometimes it's up to you to clean it up. But he definitely had a productive season and returns for his senior season. Um, Expecting to see him, maybe in a if you're Bethune Cookman, you probably want to see him with less tackles, because that means the guys in front are making some of those tackles. But you know that this is a guy who can make some things happen, and this is a secondary that lost a lot of guys. Defense as a whole lost some key guys, so it's going to be more on his shoulders this season. Also, Blake Davis from Grambling, in 12 games of action, he had 41 tackles, three and a half tackles for loss, two sacks, three interceptions, four pass breakups, a formal recovery, and a block kick. Grambling defensively last season did a great job forcing turnovers, especially interceptions. Their secondary was really ball hawks, and they that kept them in a lot of games, being able to make those things happen. And a lot of those guys were able to step up to the plate and make those plays. And Davis is definitely one of those top guys in that secondary, and worthy of this spot. Also, Shamar Hawkins from Jackson State in 14 games of action, 49 tackles, four and a half tackles for loss, three sacks, two interceptions, and a pass breakup. Um, I really think a lot of the guys did not necessarily. There was a lot of star guys on that defense. Guthrie, McDaniel, Wiggins. There were a lot of guys who really, really shone, and Hawkins had a solid season as well. So I expect him to be able to slide into one of those star type roles. As some of those big name guys moved on. There's room for a guy to blossom into a star. Um, I mean, obviously, when you play on a defense like this and a team like this, if you can shine, then you're gonna shine brighter than a lot of people. So, I really look forward to seeing him in action this season and seeing what he can do. Also, Keen Lewis from Bama State. When you talk Bama State, you talk defense and you talk secondary. He's also a guy who played in 12 games last season, had 40 tackles, two and a half tackles for loss, one sack, two interceptions, two pass breakups, one quarterback hurry, two forced fumbles, a fumble recovery, and a block kick. I love guys that can block kicks. I love special teams. And block kicks can change games. So if you got a guy that can be valuable in that aspect of the game as well as doing the job that he's on the field to do as a whole, then that's a guy who I want on the field for me. And when you play with a defense that's aggressive, you're gonna get your hands on the ball. You're not always gonna get a lot of tackles because your front six or however you want to clean it. They're cleaning up messes all day long, so you're not really in a position to necessarily have guys get away from them all the time. But when you're called upon, you can make those plays, and um, I think that's a really solid guy to have in your secondary. Rounding out my secondary, um, I wanted to go with a guy from Southern in this group, because I think they have two safeties who are both really valuable. I think it kind of was like the eye of the beholder. So I put one first team, one second team, and my first team guy was Herman Brister, the third. Finished the season with 73. Finished the season with 62 tackles, four tackles for loss, one sack, had two interceptions. Also had three pass breakups, two fumble recoveries on the season. So came in, transferred in Southern and really stepped into that role. Played in all 13 games, and other than missing some time for a targeted penalty, was not out of action often. And really as a younger guy, kind of took the reins of that, of the secondary. There were a lot of holes in that secondary, and he really kind of filled those holes and made things move smoother. Other guys had better numbers on in that secondary, but I think he was more of the uh, calming influence of that secondary. So now we move on to the special teams on first team. First team kicker is Gerardo Basil from Jackson State. Pretty much automatic. This is this guy is a weapon for you. Um, when whether it's field goals where he went 22 or 30 with a longer 48 is going 58 59 on extra points, giving him 129 total points on the season. He also was a really solid kickoff guy. On 50 kickoffs he had 2,836 yards and 11 touchbacks. um, that's like I said, he missed 9 kicks as a whole all season. um, that's field goals and extra points. That's I mean that's really good. That's a guy who you pretty comfortable with, no matter where it is on the field. And you're not really gritting your teeth when you come out to kick extra points. And that's a guy who is gonna be worthy um, of that honor of first team kicker. First team punter is Johnny Schifano from Grambling. Averaged 40.7 yards per punt on the season. We had a longer 65. On 67 punts, he had 2,729 yards. And when you don't have an offense that can consistently move the football, then you need a really good punter to be your weapon. To kind of bail you out of a lot of things. Help the defense. And he did a good job of that. And definitely one of the top returning punters. There aren't a lot of returning punters who put up really good numbers last season. So the pickings were slim, and that's not to say the guys who return are bad, but I think he was a really really solid guy last season for an offense that and team that needed that, and he definitely did it. The return specialist first team, Travis Terrell, goes without saying. Um, this guy had 18 punt returns for 300 yards, 16.6 yards per return, longer 44. Had 18 kickoff returns, 551 yards, averaged 30.6 yards per return with 2 touchdowns, had a longer 96. That's a weapon in both aspects. When you kind of talk about kicking the ball, kicking the ball to somebody or kicking the ball away from somebody, that's the guy that you're looking at in that realm. You don't want to get burned by that guy. So sometimes it's better to just kick that ball out of bounds and give up the yardage, which is kind of productive against a good offense. But you kind of have to weigh it. Do you want to give up the touchdown on the return, or do you want to give your defense some kind of a chance to make a stop, which didn't always happen either. But that's what I think. That's what you want, and that kind of guy turns a good team into a great team. That kind of guy everybody wants on their team, but that kind of guy everybody can't get. So he's automatic first team in this aspect. It would be even though they're awesome, talented return guys. I could not even put anybody above that guy. So Travis Terrell obviously takes that honor. Now we move on to our second team defense. Um, we move to our defensive line. First, we have Jamarion Ellis from Alabama A&M on a defense that wasn't necessarily a solid defense. He finished last season with 9 games of action, 34 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 5 quarterback hurries. It's going to be interesting to see, what his progression is this season with a new coaching staff. But he was able to, make some things happen in his action, even though he didn't really get, he missed 3 games, but still was able to be a productive guy on that D line. Also, I have Gideon Spottsville from Alcorn. 11 games of action, 32 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, half a sack. Obviously, numbers aren't like spectacular, but I'm looking more forward to this guy getting more attention. There's an opening with losing Malachi Bailey on the D line, so opportunities are there for a guy like that to shine, and I expect to see him continue to grow and develop. Also, Adrian Hall from Bethune-Cookman, 51 tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, a half a sack, 3 quarterback hurries, and one forced fumble. Missing one fumble recovery. Like I said before, this defense wasn't, they weren't they weren't good. I don't want to, mince words, but they weren't that good last season. But they did have some good individual pieces, and obviously, Hall was one of those guys. Um, Guys like this are going to have to continue to develop and step up. Which sounds odd talking about a senior, but these are the kind of guys that have to kind of take that next step to help that defense because pretty much every season, this team is basically a new team because they lose so many guys in the portal, they bring in so many guys in the portal. Um, you kind of have that. So it's going to be interesting to see how he does moving forward. Rounding out our defensive line is Jamal Marshall from Prairie View, one of the few guys who returns from last season that's going to be counted on to kind of help stabilize some things. He played 12 games last season at 32 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a sack, 5 quarterback hurries, and a fumble recovery. Like I said, this team to me is gonna be like a hodgepodge, and not saying that in a bad way, but it is. It's gonna be a mix of a bunch of new faces and a few guys who return who were able to do whatever it is the coaches needed them to do. And so with a guy like this, is gonna be interesting to see if he can continue to help stabilize this defense because I think last season the defense wasn't bad, but they kind of had their ups and downs. So with a new coach, a bunch of new guys, you kind of need those guys who've been around the league to kind of help stabilize some things. That takes us to our linebackers. We have two, obviously. Nayron Jenkins from FAMU, 12 games of action, had 73 tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, interception, 3 pass breakups, and a fumble recovery. Uh, with some of the losses that FAMU had on defense last season, from last season, guys are going to continue to have to step up, and defensively, this team wasn't necessarily where they were expected to be, especially against the run, and so you kind of looking at guys to continue to grow and be that guy. Um, he had a great season last season, even though that Dark Cloud defense wasn't as people expected it to be, but he was a guy who was able to get it done and I expect to see him do that again. Also, Ashton Taylor from Jackson State. If you watch my breakout players video, this guy was my breakout player for Jackson State. I think he had a solid season and he played really well in games later in the season. He finished with 50 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, uh, 4 pass breakups, 6 quarterback hurries, one fumble recovery, and one safety. Um, Definitely a guy who was very disruptive. Finished second on the team in quarterback hurries. So definitely a guy who can be a disruptor. That's a great 1-2 punch at linebacker. Um, so there are they have a great 1-2 punch at linebacker, and this guy probably could have been a star on anybody's team in the league, but he's definitely a guy I expect to continue to blossom, and definitely could easily finish the season as a first team guy if things continue to fall his way. Also, that takes us to our secondary. Um, Running down the list, we all right. I think I'm yeah. I only okay. I had to do mathematics. Marvin Smith from Alabama A&M, 12 games of action, 63 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, a pass breakup, 2 quarterback hurries, and two fumble recoveries. Excuse me, two forced fumbles. Again, new staff, new mindset. Gonna be interesting to see how he fits into everything. Definitely a guy who was around the ball a lot. So I still expect him to be that guy to continue to do that and be a key factor on the defense. Markel McLaurin from Alcorn, 11 games of action, 41 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions, 2 pass breakups, 2 fumble recoveries. Defensively, Alcorn wasn't necessarily where they typically would be, but it's going to be guys like this that are going to be counted on you know, to to help this defense. He decided to come back to Alcorn this season, so he feel like he left some food on the table. So I expect him to play hungry and make some plays for the Braves because defensively, they're gonna probably have to carry some of that load early till things get settled on the offensive side of the ball, and so I expect that to be I expect him to be a key contributor in that. Also, Jamil Sanders from FAMU in 12 games of action, 41 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack, 2 pass breakups, 2 quarterback hurries, and a fumble recovery. You can kind of continue to say the same thing. I think pass defense. I think the Rattlers were pretty solid last season. The run defense, like I said, they got better as the season went on. They had their ups and downs. Um, and so, guys like this are going to continue to be counted on to help this defense get better. And so, I think when you have experienced guys, there's only a couple steps that they could take. They could either take that big jump, or they can kind of they can kind of plateau. So you're really hoping that these kind of guys, even though they played a lot of football, they can maybe squeeze a little bit more out in that last year and get them over the hump. Rounding out next in our secondary is Horatio Johnson from Southern. Also played 12 games, 74 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 2 interceptions, 3 pass breakups, and a forced fumble. He makes a nice duo with Herman Brister the third, and like I said, sometimes I feel like he doesn't get the recognition that you should get as a guy that's been on that defense. Basically been playing in that secondary since his freshman year, but hadn't really gotten the notoriety that he deserves. Um, he's a guy who can kind of roam back there and pick off an errant pass. He can come up and make a big hit. And like I said, as you can see, he can kind of be a playmaker for that defense. So I think Southern has a great safety duo with Brister and Johnson. So one or two of those guys could be all conference, but it's gonna depend on how they continue to develop. Rounding out the secondary is a guy who I feel is more of a hybrid type of guy, and that's Brendan Barley. He's listed as a linebacker at Grambling, but he's been all over the field. He has 39 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 1 sack. Had 3 interceptions last season, 2 pass breakups. I kind of have him more as a hybrid type of guy, and being on a defense that could could pick the ball off at any moment. You're going to have a lot of guys who get their hands on the football, and that's very valuable. So, I definitely, want to recognize guys who can turn games because, those kind of plays can kind of turn games around. Next up is our special teams second team. There were quite a few guys who I could have put as the second team kicker, but I went with Brandon Gilliam. Finished 19 of 27 last season on field goals with a longer 49. He was 23 of 24 on extra points, gave him 80 total points on the season. Also kicked off 59 times for 3,211 yards and 5 touchbacks. He also punted 13 times, just to throw that out there. So and he averaged 40, he averaged 34.6 yards per punt on when he did punt. But, I think he's a guy who's gonna, I think he's motivated. He missed a big kick last season against Grambling, and I think he's working hard to not have that happen again. And he was very consistent for them. Um, only missed one extra point on the season. Um, but definitely a guy who was able to, they called on him a lot. He kicked 27 field goals, so they called on him a lot to do that. But he was able to, be fairly consistent. I do want to shout out Victor Barbosa from Alabama A&M because he did not miss a kick last season. He was 11 of 11 on field goals and 31 of 31 on extra points. So if you want to slide him in that spot instead, hey, that's all good. But you never got to recognize a guy like that. Our second team punter, there weren't a lot of, like I said, there weren't a lot of guys who really, did a bang up job um, at their position. But I went with Jeremy Ramirez from Texas Southern. He had 45 points last season with 1,700 yards, 37.7 yards per punt with a long of 71. Um, this was a team who didn't really have the most explosive offense. He was called upon to help them out, and he did that. And having a 71-yard punt on your record is definitely a field flipper, and that's what you want from your special team, from your punter. Rounding out the special teams is the return specialist, also from Texas Southern, Sean Xavier Lewis. He had six punt returns last season for 66 yards with a long of 36, but he shined in kickoff returns. 10 returns, he had 342 yards and a touchdown, averaged 34.2 yards per return. He had a 90-yard return also. This is a guy who consistently has been a big play guy when he's healthy for TSU. So um, definitely one of those guys who you can count on. When he's available, you can count on him to make a big return in a game. He might score, he might just give you great field position. And so I think he definitely is worthy of that second all conference specialist role. So that's gonna do it for today's show, man. Like I said, we'll be back on Wednesday with our media day recap, and of course Thursday is Swag Smoke. We also talk media day then too. So with that being said, man, I'm your tour guide around the Swag Seawell signing out, and I will catch y'all on the rebound. Peace.